A millionaire marries a ugly beggar for a bet, but what he discovers on their wedding night shocks him. Before we dive into the story, share in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Nathan Parker, a cold and confident millionaire, radiated arrogance as he stood on the balcony of a lavish party. Nothing seemed to faze his demeanor until an old friend, Michael Carter, approached with a glass of wine in hand and a provocative smile. "Nathan, you're always saying money can buy anything, right?" Michael said, breaking the silence. Nathan took a sip of his champagne, his expression indifferent, because it can. Michael leaned against the balcony railing and pointed toward a figure sitting on the sidewalk below a young woman. Barefoot, wearing worn-out clothes with a weary gaze. "See her?" Michael said, his tone challenging. "She's your next challenge. I bet $2 million. You can't turn her into a high society lady and stay married to her for 3 months. Nathan narrowed his eyes, locking onto the young woman for a moment. He didn't see a person, just a pawn in a game. He was confident he could win $2 million. He asked, a cynical smile forming. "You clearly underestimate my abilities, Michael." "Let's see then." Michael raised his glass in a toast. His look daring, Nathan remained silent, staring at the scene below. The young woman seemed entirely oblivious to the world around her, a small plastic cup at her side, where a few coins clinked. "Occasionally looks like tonight's entertainment has begun," Nathan murmured before turning and heading back inside. Minutes later, he was on the sidewalk, just steps away from the young woman. As he approached her, hunched figure under the dim yellow glow of a streetlight became clearer. Her disheveled hair framed a face marked by exhaustion, yet carried a silent strength that intrigued him. Her thin hands held a piece of cardboard with crooked writing. "Anything helps excuse." "Excuse me," Nathan said, his tone more of a command than a request. The woman looked up, startled. Her blue eyes, dulled by hardship, revealed a latent strength Nathan hadn't expected. "What do you want?" she asked wearily, shrinking further into herself. Nathan offered a smile that blended condescension and curiosity. "I have a proposition for you, something that could change your life." She frowned, suspicious, but said nothing. "I'm serious," he continued, kneeling to meet her eye level. "My name is Parker. I have money, a lot of it, and I need someone like you for a personal project, she replied bitterly, laughing softly. Her worn teeth showed as she spoke. "I'm not anyone's guinea pig." "Mr. Millionaire." Nathan ignored her sharp tone and pressed on with cold precision. "I'm willing to pay generously. You'll have food, clothes, a place to stay. All you need to do is marry me for 3 months." The woman blinked, incredulous. "You must be joking." "I don't joke about business," Nathan replied firmly. "It's simple, a marriage of convenience. No real commitment. After 3 months, we part ways, and you walk away with more money than you've ever imagined." She sat in silence for a few moments, processing the absurd proposal. Her life had been a string of downward spirals since losing everything. Yet something about Nathan's authoritative tone irritated her deeply. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Because you're here," he replied bluntly. Nathan's cynical response nearly made her stand and walk away, but the weight of hunger and cold kept her rooted in place. "My name is Emily Clark," she said softly, "and if I agree, how do I know this isn't some sort of scam?" Nathan pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Moments later, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. A sharply dressed driver stepped out and opened the back door. "Get in," Nathan ordered. "We'll talk somewhere more comfortable." Emily hesitated, but the temptation to escape the street even for a few hours was too strong. She climbed into the car and Nathan followed, instructing the driver to take them to the nearest hotel. The silence during the ride was almost unbearable. Emily watched the city pass by through the window, while Nathan Indiff typed something on his phone. When they arrived at the hotel, they were escorted to a luxurious suite. Emily could barely hide her astonishment. Plush carpets, refined wooden furniture, and a stunning view of the city created a scene she never could have imagined. Nathan ordered room service to bring food and clean clothes. Emily, still wary, stayed near the door, watching his every move relax. Nathan said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, "I have no interest in hurting you. This is just part of a deal." A few minutes later, the food arrived. Emily ate without hesitation, feeling her stomach finally settle. Nathan observed her intently analyzing her every gesture. "So do you agree or not?" he asked once she finished eating. Emily wiped her mouth with a napkin and took a deep breath. "How much are you paying me $1 million?" Nathan replied as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Emily nearly choked. The amount seemed unreal with that kind of money. She could start over, maybe even help others like her, but the thought of compromising her dignity was unsettling. "I need some guarantees," she said, trying to regain control of the conversation. Nathan nodded. "Everything will be in writing. My lawyer will draft a contract. You'll have food, clothes, and a room at my mansion and the wedding?" she asked hesitantly. "Tomorrow," Nathan replied bluntly. "It'll be quick, just a formality." Emily ran her hand through her hair, feeling cornered. Nathan's words sounded final, leaving no room for negotiation. At last she sighed and nodded. "All right," Nathan stood satisfied. "Excellent rest tonight. Tomorrow marks the first day of the rest of our lives." Emily watched him leave the suite, leaving her alone in the luxurious room. The silence that followed was almost deafening. She knew she had made a risky decision, but at the same time she felt like she had no other choice. The next morning, Emily was awakened by a soft knock on the door. The hotel housekeeper entered with a breakfast tray and neatly folded new clothes. Emily noticed the care in every detail: fine fabrics, neutral colors, all perfectly tailored to her size. As she ate, the weight of her decision sank in. She was selling 3 months of her life. But the promise of $1 million made her head spin. Starting over no longer felt like a distant dream. Shortly after, Nathan appeared as polished as ever. Holding a leather folder, he handed it to Emily. "Here's the contract," re-added, "sign it, and we'll meet at the courthouse at 2. Emily flipped through the document, her eyes scanning clauses and terms, outlining every detail of the agreement. Everything seemed legitimate, but the formality felt unsettling. Still, she signed, feeling like each stroke of the pen marked a point of no return. The wedding was quick and emotionless, just a few words exchanged in front of an impersonal judge. A few signatures, and it was done. Emily Clark was now officially Emily Parker. Nathan Parker's wife. There were no guests, just the driver and the lawyer as witnesses as they left the courthouse. Nathan placed a hand on the small of Emily's back, guiding her to the car. She noticed he did it not with affection, but with mechanical precision, as if fulfilling a protocol. And now, Emily asked as the car moved through the busy streets, "Now we go to my mansion. That's where you'll be staying for the next few months." Nathan said without looking up from his phone. The Parker mansion was as grand as Emily had imagined. Tall, wrought iron gates opened automatically, revealing a long driveway, lined with perfectly manicured gardens. The house itself was massive, with white columns and large windows reflecting the sky. Inside, Emily was greeted by a team of staff. Nathan gave quick instructions, telling them to prepare a room for his new wife. Meanwhile, Emily remained silent, trying to take in her surroundings. By nightfall, Nathan invited her to dinner. The dining room was enormous, with a long table illuminated by a crystal chandelier. Emily sat at one end, Nathan at the other. The distance between them felt symbolic, but Nathan, indifferent, simply began eating. "How are you settling in?" he asked in an almost casual tone. "I'm not used to this much luxury," Emily admitted. Glancing around, Nathan allowed a faint smile. "You'll get used to it after dinner." Nathan walked enelly to the room prepared for her in the hallway. Their voices echoed softly until Emily stopped and turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, voicing the question that had been haunting her. Nathan crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "Because I can." Emily narrowed her eyes, feeling a mix of anger and curiosity. "This isn't just random people, like you don't do things like this without a reason?" Nathan didn't answer. He simply gave a faint smile and stepped away. "Get some rest tomorrow. Your transformation begins later that night." Emily sat alone in her room, perched on the edge of the bed as memories from her past began to resurface. It wasn't just the grandeur of the mansion that unsettled her. There was something deeper. She realized she had crossed paths with Nathan, before suddenly a memory flashed in her mind years ago. Sitting nervously in an interview room, she had dressed in her best outfit and clutched a meticulously prepared resume. The company, Parker Enterprises, and the interviewer, Nathan Parker. She recalled Nathan's cold gaze as he dismissed her with a harsh comment. We don't waste time on amateurs. That humiliation had shattered her confidence. Her life had unraveled afterward, and now, ironically, she was married to the man who had triggered her downfall. Anger boiled inside her. How could he not remember her? Or did he remember and simply not care? Determined, Emily left her room and went to the study where she found Nathan reviewing documents. I need to ask you something, she said. Crossing her arms, Nathan looked up surprised by the interruption. What is it? Do you really not remember me? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. Nathan frowned. Puzzled, should I? Emily clenched her fists, fighting back tears a few years ago. I came to your company looking for a job. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Nathan studied her for a moment, as if trying to recall. Finally, he shrugged. I interviewed dozens of people every month. I don't remember all of them. His indifference cut. Like a knife Of course you don't, she replied bitterly to you. We're all disposable. Nathan remained silent, but something in Emily's expression unsettled him. He stood and took a step toward her, but she was already walking away, returning to her room alone again. Emily felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a cold arrangement. It was a chance to face the man who had once destroyed her, but she was no longer the vulnerable young woman from years ago. The next morning, Emily awoke with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the massive windows. The weight of last night's conversation lingered, but she resolved not to let it consume her. She got up, took a shower, and went down for breakfast, where she found Nathan already seated, reading a newspaper. Good morning, she said in a neutral tone. Nathan nodded, his eyes still on the paper. The silence between them was heavy, but Emily refused to be intimidated. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. So what's next? She finally asked. Breaking the silence, Nathan lowered the newspaper and looked at her with a faint smile. Now your transformation begins. We have a team of stylists, etiquette instructors, and even a posture coach. Soon you'll be introduced to high society as my wife. Emily rolled her eyes as if expensive clothes will erase everything I've been through. Nathan ignored the remark. Next week's business dinner will be the first test. I need you to be flawless. The following days were grueling for Emily. From early mornings, she endured endless clothing fittings, etiquette lessons, and posture drills. Though she despised the superficiality of it all, she began to notice herself adapting to the new environment. Nathan, meanwhile, kept his distance, but couldn't ignore the impact Emily was having on the household. She wasn't like the other women he had known. She didn't bow to his authority one afternoon as Emily practiced walking grace. Why, across the grand hall, Nathan entered and watched in silence when she noticed him. She stopped and crossed her arms, enjoying the shell. She asked with sarcasm. Nathan gave a small smile. Just assessing your progress. You're doing well, Emily scoffed. Glad my performance meets your approval. Mr. Parker, Nathan stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. Why does it always feel like you're ready to attack me? Maybe because you deserve it, she replied without hesitation. Nathan paused, surprised by her honesty. Then he took a step back and changed the subject. Get ready, we're going out tonight, where Emily asked, suspicious, a private dinner at a restaurant. I want to see how you handle yourself in public later that evening. Nathan and Emily arrived at one of the most upscale restaurants in the city. Emily wearing an elegant dress, if drew admiring glances, but felt uncomfortable under the attention. Nathan, however, appeared completely at ease during dinner. Nathan noticed that Emily was nervous. Her gaze shifted frequently, and she fidgeted with the strap of her dress. Relax, he said in a low voice. You're doing a great job. Emily looked up, surprised by his encouraging tone. I'm not used to any of this. Nathan leaned forward slightly. You'll adapt. Trust me for a moment. Emily saw something different in his eyes. He wasn't the cold, calculating man she'd met before. There was something more human, almost vulnerable after dinner on the ride back to the mansion. The atmosphere in the car was lighter. Nathan commented on her behavior during dinner, pointing out small improvements she could make, but without his usual critical tone. You're really taking this seriously, aren't you? Emily asked. Curious, Nathan glanced at her from the corner of his eye. I always take my bets seriously. The mention of a bet made Emily tense. She still didn't know exactly what Nathan stood to gain from all this, but the idea of being just a pawn in some game left a bitter taste in her mouth later that night. While alone in her room, Emily decided to explore the mansion. She wandered through the quiet hallways until she came across a slightly open door, leading to an office inside a massive wooden desk, was covered with documents and papers. Curious, Emily approached and began to look through the papers among contracts and financial reports. She found something that made her blood run cold, a printed conversation between Nathan and another man discussing the details of the bet. So has she agreed? One message read, "Yes, it's only a matter of time before I win." Nathan's reply stated the words dripping with indifference. Emily felt her stomach churn. She'd known there was more to Nathan's actions, but seeing the words in black and white made it all the more painful. Suddenly the door opened, and Nathan walked in. When he saw Emily holding the papers, his expression hardened. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice low and tense. Emily stared at him, clutching the papers tightly. "Is this how you see me, just a bet to feed your ego?" Nathan stepped closer, trying to take the papers, but Emily pulled back. "Answer me," she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not as simple as it seems." "Not simple." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "You've toyed with my life like I'm some disposable object." "Object," Nathan began, but she cut him off. "Don't you dare try to justify this," she shouted, throwing the papers onto the desk before storming out of the office. Nathan stood alone, staring at the scattered papers for the first time in years. He felt as though he'd lost control. Emily could barely breathe as she rushed up the stairs, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. Once inside her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm herself, discovering the BET had shattered any tolerance she'd built over the past few days. "I can't stay here," she thought, as tears of anger and humiliation streamed down her face. She looked around desperately, searching for anything that could help her escape that night while everyone slept. Emily put her plan into action. She dressed in simple clothes and packed a small bag with the few belongings she'd managed to gather since arriving at the mansion. Carefully, she opened the window, trying not to make a sound, and climbed down the trellis that held the mansion's rose vines. The cold night air enveloped her. As she finally reached the ground, Emily looked back at the mansion's imposing silhouette against the night sky. Part of her wanted to scream to make Nathan feel the pain she carried, but instead she turned and ran toward the road without looking back. The streets were empty, and Emily walked for hours, ignoring the exhaustion and the biting cold against her skin. When she finally reached the city center, she found shelter in a subway station, where she curled up on a bench and tried to sleep. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Nathan woke early and noticed Emily's absence at breakfast. At first, he wasn't concerned, thinking she just needed space after the argument the night before. But when one of the staff mentioned they hadn't seen her since dinner, Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "Check her room," he ordered, trying to stay calm. A few minutes later, the butler returned with a worried expression. "Mr. Parker, the room is empty and the window it's open." Nathan immediately ran upstairs and entered Emily's room. The bed was untouched and her clothes still hung in the closet. He walked to the window and saw marks on the trellis. She ran away. He murmured, clenching his fists without wasting time. Nathan grabbed his phone and made several calls, reaching out to his contacts to try to find her. The thought of Emily wandering the streets alone unsettled him. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him was driving him to find her, not because of the bet, but because of something new growing in his heart. Regret. Meanwhile, Emily wandered aimlessly, struggling to stay on her feet. Her strength was fading and her fever was rising. The exhaustion of the past few days was catching up with her, but she refused to stop. Every step she took was a statement of her resilience, a proof that she wouldn't let Nathan or any other man control her again. At dawn, Emily reached a small square and sat on a wooden bench. Her hands trembled and her vision blurred. She knew she needed help, but her pride kept her from asking. Closing her eyes, she felt her body give in to exhaustion. Nathan, on the other hand, had already started searching the city streets, driving his own car. He scanned every corner, every bench, looking for any sign of Emily. Guilt consumed him. He had never imagined his actions could cause so much pain. Hours later, with the sun high in the sky, he finally found her. Emily was lying on a bench, curled up under a thin blanket someone had likely given her. Her face was pale and she was trembling with fever. Emily, Nathan called out, running toward her. She slowly opened her eyes, her unfocused gaze meeting his. "What are you doing here?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here to take you home," he said, his voice firm but full of concern. "I don't have a home," she replied bitterly. Nathan picked her up, ignoring her weak attempts to resist, and carried her to the car on the way to the hospital. He remained silent, his thoughts a whirlwind. He knew he'd need more than words to regain Emily's trust at the hospital. The doctors confirmed that Emily was dehydrated and running a high fever. Nathan stayed by her side, watching her sleep as the medical staff cared for her. A heavy weight pressed on his chest for the first time in years. He felt like he wasn't in control of his own life. Hours later, when Emily finally woke up, took the pendant, feeling the symbolic weight of the gift for a moment, she was speechless. But then she looked at Nathan and gave him a faint smile. "Thank you," she said softly. In the days that followed, Emily began to notice small changes within herself. Although she still kept some distance from Nathan, moments of connection started to happen naturally. A casual conversation in the garden, a glance exchanged during a meeting. These small gestures showed that the barrier between them was beginning to fade one afternoon while walking through the garden. Nathan suddenly stopped and looked at Emily. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to a small cabin at the back of the property. When they stepped inside, Emily was surprised to see that the cabin was filled with mementos from Nathan's childhood photos, old toys, and even letters he had written to his mother as a child. "This was my refuge," Nathan explained. With a nostalgic smile, Emily picked up one of the letters and read it silently in it. A young Nathan wrote about his dreams and fears, revealing a vulnerable side. "She had never imagined you really are changing," she said, placing the letter back on the shelf. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with hope. "I'm trying for you." Emily stayed quiet for a moment before responding. "Maybe there's still a chance for us." The days following their visit to Nathan's cabin were marked by introspection and hesitation. Emily knew she was nearing a crucial decision, but her fear of being hurt again made her hold back. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed increasingly certain of his commitment. He didn't pressure Emily, but made a point of being present, showing that he was willing to face any challenge to prove his transformation. One evening, while Emily was in the studio finishing a painting, Nathan appeared at the door. He held 2 glasses of wine and seemed more relaxed than usual. "May I come in?" he asked with a slight smile. Emily nodded and he approached, handing her one of the glasses. They stood in silence for a moment, observing the painting Emily was working on. It was a portrait of a butterfly perched on a flower, its vibrant colors standing out against the soft background. "It's beautiful," Nathan said sincerely. "Thank you," Emily replied with a small smile. Nathan took a sip of wine before speaking again. "You know, the transformation of a butterfly has always fascinated me. It starts as something so small and limited, but over time it becomes something entirely different." Emily glanced at him, recognizing the parallel he was trying to draw. "And you believe people can change like that?" "I believe they can if they truly want to," he replied firmly. She stayed silent, processing his words despite her lingering doubts. Emily couldn't deny that Nathan was different the next morning. Nathan announced he had planned a trip. "I want to show you something special," he said mysteriously. Emily hesitated but eventually agreed. A private plane took them to a small village in the mountains, a peaceful place surrounded by breathtaking landscapes. Upon arrival, Nathan led her to a simple yet cozy house he had prepared, especially for the occasion. "Why did you bring me here?" Emily asked. Intrigued, Nathan looked around, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. "This place reminds me of how life can be simple and yet so full of meaning. I wanted us to have a moment away from everything so we can truly connect." During their time there, Emily and Nathan shared moments that once seemed impossible. They walked together on trails, cooked simple meals, and talked about their lives, hopes, and fears. Emily began to see a side of Nathan he had hidden for so long, a human, vulnerable side that deeply moved her. On one of these walks, as they rested by a lakeside, Nathan broke the silence. Emily, I know I still have a lot to prove to you, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, this change in me is real. She looked at him surprised by the intensity in his voice. And what do you want from me, Nathan? Just a chance, he replied, simply. Emily felt a lump in her throat. For so long, she had built walls around her heart. But now, standing before Nathan, those walls were beginning to crumble when they returned to the mansion. Emily felt different. There was a clarity in her thoughts that she hadn't had before, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could trust Nathan again. Still, she knew the final decision needed to be made carefully. The morning air was crisp and fresh, and the soft sunlight was beginning to brighten the mansion. Emily woke slowly, the golden rays slipping through the partially open curtains. Sitting up in bed, she looked around, taking in the peaceful silence that enveloped the house. Something inside her had shifted over the past few days. The confusion that had haunted her for so long was starting to lift after their trip to the mountains. Emily felt as though the walls she'd built around her heart were finally coming down. She remembered every moment she'd shared. Breakfast, Nathan suggested they take a walk in the garden. Emily agreed, and together they strolled along the flower-lined path. The quiet was filled with the songs of birds and the soft rustle of trees in the breeze. When they reached a small stone bench under an old tree, Nathan stopped and turned to face her. Emily, I need to ask you something, he said, his voice serious. She looked at him, waiting a while ago. I promised I'd do everything I could to earn back your trust. I need to know, have I made any progress? Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his question. She met his gaze, noticing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. You've changed, Nathan, she admitted. And yes, you're earning my trust back. Nathan smiled, but there was something else he needed to say. Then I have another question, he said, lowering himself to one knee and pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Emily gasped, surprised, as Nathan opened the box to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. Emily Clark, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not because of a contract, but because of love? His words hung in the air, and Emily felt tears well up in her eyes for a moment. She was speechless, her heart racing. Finally, she smiled and nodded. Yes, Nathan, I will. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced under the shade of the tree. It was a simple moment, yet profoundly meaningful, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The wedding took place just a few weeks later in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Only a few close friends and partners from their social projects were present, but the love and joy in the air were undeniable. Emily wore a light lace dress that made her look almost ethereal, while Nathan, in a sharp suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. During their vows, Nathan held Emily's hands tightly, his voice filled with emotion. Emily, you've taught me the true meaning of love, patience, and redemption. I promise to stand by your side through every moment, good or bad, and dedicate my life to making you happy. With tears in her eyes, Emily responded. Nathan, you've shown me that people can change and that love can grow even in the most unlikely circumstances. I promise to love you and walk by your side as we build our future together. The applause and smiles from their guests followed their kiss, sealing their commitment to one another. For the first time, Emily felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. Their first year of marriage was full of challenges, but also moments of joy and growth together. Emily and Nathan worked to expand their social projects, helping hundreds of people rebuild their lives. Their relationship deepened, rooted in trust and genuine love. One morning, as they were in the kitchen preparing breakfast together, Emily turned to Nathan with a shy smile. I have some news for you, she said, her eyes sparkling. Curious, Nathan stopped what he was doing and looked at her. What is it? We're going to have a baby. Emily revealed, her voice filled with emotion. For a moment, Nathan was speechless, but soon a radiant smile lit up his face. He stepped closer and embraced her tightly. This is wonderful, Emily, he exclaimed. His voice filled with emotion. The news brought even more joy to their lives, and the following months were spent preparing the baby's room and planning for their future as a family. The day Grace Parker was born was one of the most emotional moments in Emily and Nathan's lives. When they finally held their daughter in their arms, both felt an instant connection, as if all the challenges of the past had prepared them for that moment. She's perfect, Emily whispered. tears in her eyes just like her mother Nathan replied, gently stroking Grace's head. Grace's arrival further strengthened the bond between them, and the mansion, once marked by coldness and formality, became a warm, loving home. The following years were filled with achievements. The community center that Nathan and Emily had founded became a beacon of hope, helping thousands of people find new opportunities. Emily continued painting, using her art to raise funds for social projects, while Nathan became a mentor to young entrepreneurs aiming to make a difference. Grace grew up surrounded by love, her laughter filling the house with joy. Nathan and Emily, now partners in every sense of the word, looked to the future with hope and gratitude. One evening, as they watched Grace sleep, Nathan held Emily's hand and whispered, "You've changed my life in ways I never imagined." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, "And you've shown me that love can bloom in the most unexpected places together." They looked ahead, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would always stand by each other, united by the love that transformed them. Do you think Emily did the right thing by forgiving Nathan? Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Don't forget to subscribe, be to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories.